The village of Zankaria was alive with the sound of music and laughter. It was a day of joy, as the beloved daughter of the village chief, Amina, was to marry her childhood sweetheart, Usman. Families from neighboring villages poured in, bringing gifts wrapped in colorful fabrics, their faces glowing with excitement. The village square was adorned with lanterns, casting a warm glow over the festivities that carried on into the night. The reception was held under a sprawling baobab tree, its branches twinkling with strings of lights. Plates of jollof rice, suya, and fried plantains were passed around, the aroma mingling with the cool evening breeze. Amina's laugh echoed through the night as she danced with Usman, surrounded by friends and family. No one suspected that this joyous night would be their last together. As the celebration reached its peak, an old beggar appeared at the edge of the square. His face was weathered, and his eyes glinted with an otherworldly light. He carried a staff adorned with strange carvings and muttered words no one could understand. "Beware the shadows that dance too closely," he said in a raspy voice before disappearing into the crowd. The villagers dismissed him as a madman, laughing off his cryptic warning. But Yarrow, the village elder known for his wisdom, watched the beggar with unease. Something about him was not of this world, he murmured to himself, clutching his prayer beads tightly. As the festivities carried on, a strange wind swept through the square. The lanterns flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Children playing near the baobab tree stopped abruptly, their laughter turning to silence as they stared into the darkness beyond the lights. Amina noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Usman," she whispered, her smile faltering. "Does something feel off to you?" Usman glanced around, his brow furrowing. "It's just the wind," he assured her, though his voice lacked conviction. Still, the unease settled over the villagers like a heavy blanket. As midnight approached, the drums and music slowed, signaling the end of the night's festivities. Guests began to gather their belongings, bidding farewell to the couple. But just as the first group stepped into the shadows beyond the square, the lanterns dimmed again. This time, the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. "Did you see that?" Yarrow's voice trembled as he pointed toward the vanished guests. "They're gone." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but when villagers went to investigate, they found nothing, no footprints, no sign of struggle. The group had simply vanished. Panic erupted as more guests attempted to leave, only to disappear as soon as they stepped into the shadows. Amina clung to Usman, her heart pounding. "What is happening?" she cried. The remaining villagers huddled together in the square, their faces pale with fear. "No one leaves," Yarrow commanded. "We must stay together until dawn." The once joyful celebration turned into a night of terror. Mothers held their children close, and the men formed a protective circle around the group. The air grew colder, and an unnatural silence settled over Zankaria, broken only by the occasional sob or whispered prayer. As dawn approached, Yarrow ventured cautiously to the edge of the square, his prayer beads clutched tightly in his hand. The first light of day should have revealed the path leading out of the village, but what he saw instead chilled him to his core. The road had vanished entirely, replaced by an unbroken expanse of dark forest. "This is no ordinary darkness," Yarrow whispered to himself. He turned back to the villagers, his face pale. "The village is no longer connected to the world we know. Something has sealed us in." Amina and Usman exchanged worried glances. "What could have caused this?" Usman asked. Yarrow's response was grim. The old beggar's warning was not random. "We have disturbed forces we do not understand." As the day wore on, the villagers tried to keep themselves busy to stave off the growing fear. But strange occurrences began to unfold. A cold wind swept through the square, carrying with it faint whispers. Children pointed toward the forest, claiming to see figures moving among the trees. "They're calling us," one child said, his voice trembling. "They want us to follow." Yarrow gathered the villagers and urged them to stay within the square. "Do not heed the voices," he warned. "Whatever lies beyond the trees is not of this world." Amina's fear deepened as she clung to Usman. "We can't stay here forever," she said. What if we're trapped for good? Usman tried to comfort her, though his own uncertainty was evident. We'll find a way, he promised. We have to. Steady, but tinged with urgency. We must uncover the meaning behind the sigils, he said. They were carved for a purpose, and it's clear they are tied to our plight. The villagers murmured in agreement, though fear lurked behind their eyes. Amina clutched Usman's arm, her voice a shaky whisper. Who could possibly know what they mean? She asked. Yarrow paused, his gaze shifting toward the direction where the beggar had disappeared. There is only one who might know, the old beggar who warned us. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. The beggar had vanished into the night, and his cryptic words now seemed like a prophecy. If he warned us, he may hold the key to saving us, Yarrow continued. But finding him will not be easy. The forest, it has a will of its own now. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. The forest had already claimed those who ventured too far, and the whispers that echoed through its depths seemed to promise no safe return. Still, Yarrow's determination sparked a flicker of hope. We cannot afford to do nothing, he concluded. A search must be organized immediately. As the sun began its slow descent, a group of volunteers prepared to venture into the forest. Musa, the village blacksmith, stood at the forefront, his broad shoulders and determined gaze offering a sense of reassurance to the others. Beside him was Usman, his hand gripping a machete tightly. Each man carried lanterns and prayer beads, their faces taut with apprehension. Before they left, Yarrow stepped forward, holding a small calabash filled with a mix of herbs and ashes. He marked each of their foreheads with a streak of the substance. This will guide the ancestors to watch over you, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Do not stray from one another, and if the whispers grow too loud, pray with all your heart. Amina watched as Usman took his place among the group, her eyes brimming with tears. Be careful, she whispered, her voice trembling. He placed a gentle hand on her cheek, forcing a smile despite the fear knotting his stomach. I will return to you, he said, though neither could be certain of his words. The men entered the forest, their lanterns casting faint orbs of light in the oppressive darkness. The trees loomed above them, their twisted branches appearing like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The air was thick, carrying a faint metallic scent that made the group exchange uneasy glances. Every step they took seemed to echo unnaturally, as if the forest itself was alive and listening. After an hour of careful progress, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, like a distant breeze rustling through the leaves. But as they ventured deeper, the voices grew clearer. They weren't mere murmurs. They were calls, beckoning the men with eerily familiar tones. Usman, Musa, come closer, the voices said, mimicking loved ones left behind in the village. Usman gritted his teeth, forcing himself to ignore the voice that sounded so much like Amina's. It's not real, he muttered under his breath, clutching the prayer beads in his pocket. But for one of the younger men, Ibrahim, the whispers were too much. He turned suddenly, his eyes wide with terror. My mother! She's calling me, he cried, bolting into the shadows before anyone could stop him. Ibrahim. No! Musa shouted, his voice desperate as he ran after him. The others hesitated, their courage faltering as the forest seemed to close in around them. Usman grabbed Musa by the arm, pulling him back. We can't scatter, he said firmly. If we lose each other, none of us will make it out. They stood in silence, the realization sinking in that Ibrahim was gone. The group huddled together, their lanterns trembling in their hands as the forest whispered louder, mocking their fear. They pressed on, each step feeling heavier than the last. As they approached a clearing, a faint glow appeared in the distance. It wasn't the warm light of their lanterns, but a cold, bluish hue that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. What is that? One of the men asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Musa tightened his grip on his machete. We have to find out, he said, leading the way toward the source of the light. When they reached the clearing, the sight before them was both mesmerizing and horrifying. In the center stood a small altar carved from black stone, its surface covered in the same sigils that adorned the baobab tree. Above it hovered a ghostly figure, a woman with translucent skin and hollow eyes. Her long, flowing hair seemed to merge with the mist that surrounded her, and her voice was a haunting melody. "Why have you come?" she asked, her gaze piercing through each man. "You disturbed the balance, and now you seek answers? What will you sacrifice to restore what you have broken?" The men fell to their knees, their courage drained by the spirit's overwhelming presence. Usman, his heart pounding, forced himself to speak. "We didn't know. Please, tell us how we can undo this. Tell us how we can save our village." The spirit's hollow eyes fixed on him, and a cold smile played across her lips. "The answers lie at the heart of the baobab," she said. "But be warned, the path you must walk is one of pain and truth. Only the brave will survive." With that, the spirit and the glowing altar vanished, leaving the men alone in the silent clearing. They exchanged nervous glances, the weight of her words sinking in. "The baobab," Musa murmured. "It's always been at the center of this." But what did she mean by pain and truth? Usman stood, his resolve hardening. "Whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady. "We have to go back and face it. For the village. For our families." One by one, the others nodded, their fear giving way to determination. Together, they turned and began the long trek back to Zankaria, their mission now clearer than ever. As the group moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. Their breaths fogged in front of them, though the season should have brought warmth. The whispers began to morph, turning into snippets of conversations, childhood songs, and even prayers they had long forgotten. Each man felt as if the forest had reached into their minds, pulling out the most intimate fragments of their memories. Usman stumbled as a vision flashed before him. He was standing at the edge of the baobab tree, holding Amina's hands as they promised their love beneath its sprawling branches. But the vision twisted. Amina's face grew pale, her eyes hollow, her voice calling his name in a mournful wail. He shook his head, trying to push the image away, but her voice lingered. You left me." Musa placed a hand on Usman's shoulder, breaking the trance. "We have to keep moving," Musa said. "The forest is trying to break us." They pushed forward until they reached a clearing where the trees seemed to bow inward, forming a natural dome. In the center stood another altar, similar to the one they had seen before, but this one was cracked and covered in vines. The sigils glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This is a place of power," Musa whispered, though his voice quivered. "But what kind of power?" As they approached the altar, the ground beneath them trembled. A figure emerged from the shadows, an ancient man draped in tattered robes, his face obscured by a hood. He carried a staff similar to the beggar's, but his presence was far more commanding. "You seek answers," the man said, his voice echoing as if spoken from many mouths at once. "But the answers you seek will cost you more than you are willing to give." Usman tightened his grip on her hand, his jaw set. "If it's the only way to save the village, we have to face it," he said, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. "Whatever the price, we can't let fear stop us." Yarrow stepped forward, raising his prayer beads. "We will call upon the ancestors for guidance. Tonight, we prepare ourselves for whatever lies ahead." That evening, the villagers gathered in the square, carrying lanterns to ward off the encroaching darkness. Yarrow led them in a solemn chant, his deep voice resonating through the air. The flames from their lanterns flickered, as if responding to the rhythm of their prayers, casting dancing shadows on the walls of their homes. The baobab tree stood at the center of the square, its roots pulsating faintly with an eerie glow. Amina couldn't tear her eyes away from it, a mix of dread and fascination churning within her. She glanced at Usman, who stood stoically beside her, his eyes fixed on Yarrow. As the chanting reached its crescendo, a sudden gust of wind extinguished all the lanterns at once. Gasps rippled through the crowd as darkness enveloped the village. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the soft rustling of leaves. Then, a faint golden light began to emanate from the baobab tree, growing stronger until it bathed the entire square in its glow. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the night. "The balance must be restored," it said. The villagers froze, their breaths caught in their throats. To undo the curse, the truth must be revealed, and the price must be paid. Yarrow stepped forward, his voice steady. "We are ready," he said. "Reveal what must be done." The golden light from the baobab intensified, and the villagers shielded their eyes as the tree seemed to come alive. Its branches swayed as though moved by an unseen wind, and the sigils carved into its trunk glowed brightly. Suddenly, the light coalesced into an image, hovering above the tree like a shimmering mirage. The image revealed a scene from the past, Zankaria as it had been many years ago, vibrant and bustling with life. At the center of the vision stood the baobab tree, surrounded by villagers performing a sacred ritual. Their chants echoed faintly through the square, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the present. "This tree has always been the heart of Zankaria," Yarrow whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It connects us to the ancestors and the spirits of the land." But as the vision continued, the scene darkened. A group of outsiders arrived, their faces shadowed and their intentions unclear. They approached the baobab, wielding axes and torches. The villagers in the vision tried to stop them, but a struggle ensued. The outsiders damaged the tree, carving deep wounds into its bark and scattering its sacred roots. The voice spoke again, its tone heavy with sorrow. "The balance was broken that day. The tree's wounds have festered, and the curse was born from the greed and violence of man." The vision faded, leaving the villagers in stunned silence. Amina clutched Usman's arm, her voice trembling. "The outsiders, they brought this upon us. But how can we heal what they destroyed?" Yarrow bowed his head, his prayer beads slipping through his fingers. "We must make amends," he said. "But the tree demands more than just words. It demands a sacrifice of pure intent." As the villagers processed the vision, the golden light around the baobab dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of the sigils. Yarrow turned to the crowd, his expression grave. "The ancestors have shown us the truth," he said. "Now we must decide who will step forward to restore the balance." A murmur of unease rippled through the villagers. No one spoke, their fear holding them captive. Finally, Usman stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I will do it," he said. "For Amina, for our village. I will face whatever the tree demands." Amina's heart ached as she grabbed his arm. "You can't," she pleaded. "There has to be another way." Usman turned to her, his expression softening. "If there is, we won't find it by standing still," he said. "I have to try." Yarrow nodded solemnly. "Usman's courage is a beacon for us all," he said. "But this is not a task for one person alone. The ancestors demand unity. Who else will stand with him?" Slowly, Musa stepped forward, followed by a few others. Amina, her fear overshadowed by her love for Usman, joined them. Together, they formed a circle around the baobab tree, their hands clasped tightly. As the group prepared to face the baobab's challenge, the sigils on the tree glowed brighter, illuminating their faces with an ethereal light. The whispers in the forest grew louder, forming a strange harmony that seemed to guide their steps. "The tree will reveal its heart," Yarrow said, his voice trembling. "When it does, you must follow the path it shows you." The ground beneath the tree shifted, and a hollow opened at its base, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. A cold wind rushed up from the depths, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. Usman took a deep breath, his hand tightening around Amina's. "We go together," he said. With the villagers watching in silence, the group descended into the heart of the baobab, the light from the sigils guiding their way. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers became clearer, their voices now unmistakably human. "What lies ahead?" Amina whispered, her voice barely audible. Usman shook his head. "Whatever it is," he said, "we face it together." The staircase spiraled deep into the earth, the walls narrowing and the air growing colder with every step. The faint glow from the sigils on the baobab's roots illuminated the path, casting eerie shadows that danced on the stone walls. Amina's hand trembled in Usman's as they descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow silence. "This feels like a tomb," Musa whispered, his voice barely audible over the whispers that now filled the air. The sounds were no longer distant. They seemed to come from all around them, as if the walls themselves were alive and listening. At last, the group reached a vast chamber, its ceiling high and covered with more glowing sigils. In the center of the room stood a circular pool of water, its surface rippling despite the still air. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like an unseen wind. "The pool," Yarrow murmured. "It is the heart of the tree." As they stepped closer, the water began to glow, revealing images of the past. They saw the villagers of Zankaria performing sacred rituals, their faces serene and full of devotion. But the images darkened, showing the arrival of the outsiders who had desecrated the tree. The water turned crimson, and the voices of the ancestors cried out in anguish. "This is where it began," Yarrow said, his voice trembling. "The tree remembers everything." A figure emerged from the pool, its form shimmering like light reflected on water. It was the guardian they had seen in the forest, but now its presence was even more commanding. "You have come seeking to restore the balance," the spirit said, its voice echoing through the chamber. "But the path is not without cost." The group knelt instinctively, their fear and awe overpowering them. "What must we do?" Usman asked, his voice steady despite the fear clutching his chest. The spirit's hollow eyes fixed on him. "The tree requires a sacrifice," it said. "A life freely given, one pure of heart and intent. Only then will the wounds be healed and the curse lifted." Amina gasped, clutching Usman's arm. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "There has to be another way." The spirit's gaze softened, but its tone remained resolute. "The balance must be restored. Without the sacrifice, the village will remain cursed, and the forest will consume all." The group sat in silence, the weight of the spirit's words pressing down on them like a physical force. Usman looked around at his companions, their faces pale and filled with fear. Finally, he stood, his voice calm but determined. "If this is what it takes to save Zankaria, then I will do it." Amina's eyes filled with tears as she grabbed his hand. "No, I won't let you. There has to be another way." Usman cupped her face gently, his own eyes glistening. "This village is our home, Amina. If I can save it, then my life will have meaning." Musa stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "We can't let one man carry this burden alone," he said. "If a life must be given, then let it be decided by the ancestors." Yarrow nodded solemnly, his hands clasping his prayer beads. "The ancestors will guide us," he said. "We must seek their wisdom." The group gathered around the pool, their hearts heavy as Yarrow began to chant. The sigils on the walls glowed brighter, and the water in the pool began to ripple violently. One by one, the villagers present stepped forward, offering their prayers and pledging their willingness to accept the ancestors' decision. The chamber grew colder, and the whispers turned into a chorus of voices, each one layered over the other. The spirit raised its hand, and the room fell silent. "The choice has been made," it said, its gaze resting on Usman. Amina cried out, clutching him tightly. "No, this isn't fair." The spirit's expression softened. "The ancestors see the purity of his heart," it said. "His sacrifice will restore the balance and bring peace to Zankaria." Usman knelt before the pool, his face calm despite the tears streaming down Amina's cheeks. "If this is my destiny, I accept it," he said. The spirit extended its hand, and the water began to glow, surrounding Usman in a cocoon of light. The light enveloping Usman grew brighter, filling the chamber with a warmth that was both comforting and sorrowful. Amina fell to her knees, her sobs echoing through the room as the other villagers bowed their heads in reverence. The spirit spoke, its voice gentle but firm. "Through his sacrifice, the wounds of the past will be healed and the curse lifted. The balance will be restored." As the light reached its peak, Usman turned to Amina one last time, a small, sad smile on his lips. "Live well," he said softly. "And remember me." With those words, he disappeared into the light. The pool glowed brilliantly for a moment before fading, leaving only the faint ripples on its surface. The sigils on the walls dimmed, and the whispers ceased, replaced by a profound silence. Amina remained kneeling, her tears falling into the now-still pool. Yarrow placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his own eyes filled with sorrow. "His sacrifice will not be forgotten," he said. "He has saved us all." The group ascended the staircase, their hearts heavy but their spirits uplifted by the knowledge that Usman's sacrifice had saved the village. When they emerged into the square, they were met with a wondrous sight. The baobab tree, once wounded and dying, now stood tall and vibrant. Its roots glowed faintly, and its leaves shimmered as if touched by sunlight. The villagers gathered around, their faces filled with awe and reverence. The whispers from the forest had ceased, and a profound stillness had settled over Zankaria. "The balance has been restored," Yarrow said, his voice filled with wonder. "The curse is lifted." Though grief lingered in their hearts, the villagers knew that Usman's sacrifice had given them a second chance. Amina stood beneath the tree, her hand resting on its bark. "You'll always be here," she whispered. "In this tree, in this village. Always." The following days in Zankaria were marked by a profound silence. The joy that once filled the air seemed to have been carried away with Usman's sacrifice. Villagers went about their daily tasks, but their movements were slow, their faces drawn with grief. The baobab tree, vibrant and alive, stood as a constant reminder of what had been lost to save the village. Amina rarely left the tree's side. She spent her days sitting beneath its sprawling branches, her fingers tracing the grooves of its bark as if seeking a connection to Usman. The villagers gave her space, respecting her mourning. Yarrow, however, visited often, bringing her food and sitting silently beside her, offering quiet support. "He gave us everything," Yarrow said one evening, breaking the silence. "But his sacrifice wasn't just for the tree. It was for the unity of our people. We must honor his memory by protecting what he fought for." Amina nodded, though her heart still ached. "I will never forget him," she whispered. "But how do I move forward when a part of me is gone?" "You carry him in your heart," Yarrow replied, "and through you he lives on." With the curse lifted, the land around Zankaria began to flourish. Crops that had withered began to grow again, their green shoots reaching toward the sun. The forest, once oppressive and filled with whispers, was now calm and welcoming. Animals returned, and the villagers felt a renewed sense of hope. The baobab tree became a place of pilgrimage. People from neighboring villages came to see the miraculous tree that had saved Zankaria, bringing offerings and prayers. The villagers shared the story of Usman's sacrifice, ensuring that his bravery would never be forgotten. Amina, though still grieving, began to take an active role in guiding these visitors. "The tree is a symbol of balance," she told them. "It reminds us that harmony comes from sacrifice and unity." Her words resonated deeply, and many left the village inspired to foster peace in their own communities. Slowly, Amina found purpose in her pain, channeling her love for Usman into protecting the legacy he had left behind. One morning, as Amina sat beneath the baobab, she noticed something unusual. The roots of the tree had shifted slightly, revealing a small sapling growing beside it. Its tiny leaves glowed faintly, mirroring the light of the larger tree. Amina reached out, her fingers brushing against its delicate branches. "The tree has chosen you," Yarrow said, approaching from behind. Amina turned to him, her expression filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" "The sapling is a gift," Yarrow explained. "A symbol of renewal and continuity. It thrives because of your connection to Usman and the sacrifices made to restore balance." Amina felt a surge of warmth in her chest. For the first time since Usman's death, she smiled. "Then I will nurture it," she said. "I will protect it with everything I have." From that day forward, Amina took on the role of the baobab's guardian. She tended to the sapling and the tree, ensuring they remained healthy and strong. The villagers looked to her for guidance, and she became a symbol of resilience and hope for Zankaria. Years passed, and Zankaria flourished under the shadow of the baobab tree. The village became a beacon of unity, its story spreading far and wide. People from across the land visited to witness the miraculous tree and hear the tale of Usman's sacrifice. The sapling grew tall, its leaves shimmering with the same ethereal glow as the original tree. Amina, now older but still vibrant, stood beneath the trees, watching as children played around their roots. She saw in their laughter a future filled with promise and harmony. Yarrow, now frail with age, stood beside her, his prayer beads clutched tightly in his hands. "You've done well," he said, his voice soft but filled with pride. "Zankaria is stronger because of you." Amina nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It was never just me," she said. "It was Usman. It was you. It was all of us." As the sun set over Zankaria, casting the baobab tree in a golden glow, Amina placed her hand on its trunk. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." The tree seemed to hum softly in response, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. And in that moment, Amina knew that Zankaria would continue to thrive, its people united by the legacy of sacrifice and love. To honor Usman's sacrifice and the restoration of the baobab tree, the villagers of Zankaria decided to establish an annual festival of remembrance. The first festival was planned with care, its purpose to celebrate the unity and resilience that had saved the village. Amina, now regarded as the spiritual guide of the village, oversaw the preparations with Yarrow's guidance. On the morning of the festival, the square was adorned with vibrant cloths and garlands. Families brought offerings of fruits and flowers to the baobab tree, laying them gently at its base. Children sang songs of gratitude, their voices filling the air with a lightness that reminded everyone of what had been gained, even in the face of great loss. As the sun began to set, Amina stood before the villagers beneath the glowing branches of the baobab. Her voice was steady as she addressed them. "This tree is not only a symbol of what we have endured, but also of what we can achieve together. Let us never forget the sacrifice that brought us here, and let us strive to protect the harmony that binds us." Her words were met with cheers and applause, and the festival continued into the night, with laughter and stories weaving a tapestry of hope and remembrance. News of Zankaria's miraculous recovery continued to spread, drawing visitors from distant lands. Among them were scholars, merchants, and even rulers, all curious to witness the legendary baobab tree and learn from the village's story. With each new visitor, Zankaria's influence grew, becoming a beacon of wisdom and peace. One day, a group of travelers arrived, claiming to be descendants of the outsiders who had once desecrated the tree. They came bearing gifts and apologies, their leader, a man named Diko, bowing deeply before Amina and the villagers. "Our ancestors wronged this village and its sacred tree," he said. "We come seeking forgiveness and to offer our aid in any way we can." Amina, though surprised, welcomed them warmly. "The past cannot be changed," she said, "but the future is ours to shape. If you truly seek to make amends, then let us work together to protect the balance that has been restored." The visitors stayed for many weeks, learning from the villagers and contributing to their efforts to nurture the baobab and its sapling. Their presence marked a turning point, as the story of Zankaria's unity and forgiveness spread even further. Years passed, and the sapling beside the baobab grew into a magnificent tree of its own, its branches intertwining with those of its elder. The villagers began to refer to the pair as the twin hearts of Zankaria, a living testament to the power of sacrifice and renewal. Amina, now gray-haired but still vibrant, often sat beneath the twin trees, sharing their story with anyone who visited. The children of Zankaria grew up hearing her tales, learning the importance of unity, courage, and respect for the natural world. One day, as she rested beneath the trees, she felt a gentle breeze rustle the leaves. It carried a familiar warmth, and she closed her eyes, imagining Usman's presence. "You're here," she whispered. "You've always been here." The twin trees seemed to shimmer in response, their leaves glinting like gold in the sunlight. Amina smiled, her heart filled with peace, knowing that Zankariya's future was secure in the hands of those who had inherited its legacy. As the twin trees continued to thrive, Amina noticed that the baobab had begun producing seeds. These seeds were unlike any other. They glowed faintly, much like the tree itself. She took this as a sign that the blessings of the ancestors were meant to be shared beyond the borders of Zankariya. Gathering the seeds carefully, Amina summoned the villagers. "These seeds are a gift from the ancestors," she said. "They are not just for Zankariya, but for the world. They represent unity, resilience, and the power of sacrifice." The villagers agreed, and they decided to send emissaries to other villages and towns, carrying the seeds as symbols of peace and renewal. Each emissary was tasked with planting a seed in their destination, ensuring that the lessons of Zankariya would spread far and wide. One by one, the emissaries departed, their journeys blessed with prayers and songs. Amina watched them go with a sense of pride and hope. "The world will know our story," she said to Yarrow, who stood beside her, "and it will carry Usman's legacy far beyond these borders." Months later, as the seeds began to take root in distant lands, a new challenge arose. Travelers returned to Zankariya with unsettling news. In some places where the seeds had been planted, strange events were occurring. Crops failed, animals fled, and whispers began to haunt the night. "It's as if the curse has followed the seeds," one traveler reported. "The trees grow strong, but something dark lingers around them." Amina felt a pang of guilt. Had they unintentionally spread the curse that once plagued Zankariya? She turned to Yarrow, seeking guidance. "What have we done?" she asked. "We thought we were spreading hope, but it seems we've unleashed something else." Yarrow, though troubled, remained calm. "The balance we restored here may not yet be complete," he said. "The ancestors chose us to bear this burden, and it is our duty to ensure that balance is restored wherever the seeds have gone." Amina, determined to set things right, gathered a group of villagers to embark on a journey to the affected lands. "We must see this through," she told them. "We owe it to the ancestors and to those who welcomed our gifts with open hearts." The group, including Yarrow despite his advanced age, set out with supplies and sacred herbs from the baobab. They traveled for weeks, visiting villages where the seeds had been planted. In each place, they performed rituals to cleanse the land and invoked the blessings of the ancestors to dispel any lingering darkness. The process was arduous, and not every attempt succeeded immediately. In some places, the trees bore fruit only after days of prayer and offerings. But slowly, the curse began to lift, and the lands healed. One night, as the group rested beneath the stars, Amina dreamed of the baobab tree. In her dream, its branches reached into the heavens, and its roots stretched deep into the earth, connecting all life. A voice, soft and melodic, spoke to her. "The seeds carry both light and shadow," it said. "Balance is not achieved through growth alone but through understanding and unity." When Amina awoke, she shared her dream with the group. "The ancestors are telling us that the seeds are a test," she said. "They represent the duality of life, light and shadow, hope and despair. It is up to us to guide others in nurturing the light while understanding the shadow." Yarrow nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of wisdom and pride. "Then our mission is not just to heal," he said. "It is to teach." In the months that followed, Amina and her group became known as the Teachers of Balance. They traveled tirelessly, sharing the story of Zankariya and the lessons they had learned. Villagers and townsfolk alike gathered to hear their teachings, inspired by the tale of sacrifice and unity. The seeds, once feared, became symbols of hope once more. Communities learned to care for the trees with reverence, understanding that their power came from balance, not just within the land but within themselves. Amina's name became known far and wide, and her role as the guardian of the twin hearts was celebrated across the land. Though she often missed Zankaria, she found comfort in knowing that Usman's legacy lived on in every tree that grew from the seeds. Years passed and Amina grew older. The sapling she had nurtured beside the baobab was now a mighty tree, its branches entwined with its elder. The village of Zankaria had become a hub of culture and learning, its people thriving under the protection of the twin hearts. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the trees in a golden glow, Amina sat beneath their branches. Yarrow, now frail and rarely seen outside his home, joined her. "The world owes you much," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amina shook her head, smiling softly. "The world owes us nothing," she replied. "We owe everything to those who came before us and to those who will come after." As night fell, Amina closed her eyes, her heart full of peace. The breeze rustled the leaves above her, carrying with it the warmth of Usman's memory. And as the stars appeared in the sky, the villagers of Zankaria gathered around the twin hearts, their laughter and songs filling the night. Under the golden glow of the twin hearts, a new generation rose in Zankaria, their hearts filled with the lessons passed down from Amina and Yarrow. The village became a haven for wisdom, its name synonymous with resilience and harmony. Among these young villagers was Bala, Amina's great-nephew. Bala had inherited Amina's curiosity and passion for storytelling. Often found sitting at the base of the twin hearts, Bala would listen to tales from elders and then share them with visiting travelers. His voice carried a cadence that reminded everyone of Amina in her prime. One day, as Bala recounted the story of Usman's sacrifice, a visitor interrupted. "Do you ever worry that such a tale is too heavy for a child?" asked a merchant from afar. Bala smiled softly and gestured toward the trees. "The truth of life is both heavy and light. The trees remind us that growth comes from understanding both." The merchant left impressed, and Bala felt a swell of pride. He looked to the twin hearts and whispered, "I'll protect your legacy. I promise." As Bala grew, he felt an urge to spread the teachings of the twin hearts beyond Zankaria. With the villagers' blessing, he set out to visit lands where the seeds had taken root. His journey mirrored that of his great-aunt Amina, but came with new challenges and discoveries. In one village, he found a tree whose light had dimmed. The locals had argued over its care, dividing the community. Bala listened patiently, his words weaving unity as he shared the story of Zankaria's balance. By the time he left, the villagers were tending to the tree together, their divisions healed. Years turned to decades, and Zankaria continued to thrive. The twin hearts stood as eternal witnesses to the lives they touched, their light unwavering. Visitors still came, inspired by the village's story of courage and unity. The seeds planted across the lands grew into a network of trees, connecting communities in a shared purpose. Amina's name became legend, her story passed down with reverence. And though her mortal life had ended, her spirit lived on in the laughter of children playing beneath the trees, in the whispered prayers of travelers, and in the gentle rustle of leaves that carried her memory across the world.